everyone, and welcome to the Fantasy Slant, powered by Pro Football Focus and brought to you by DraftKings. I'm your usual host, Michael Moore, along with our usual co-host, Russell Clay. Say hello, Russ.
Aloha.
And I know what you're thinking. You're like, hey, the regular season's over. What are you two knuckleheads still doing in my podcast feed? Well, fear not. We are still here. We're going to recap Week 17, which... I don't know, Russ. I don't know about you. I know one or two people that had fantasy leagues still going in Week 17, which I don't really understand. But I know it seems like a travesty. But we'll get to that. More importantly, though, there's a lot of coaching changes we'll need to get to. So you and I will look at those and how that affects next year's fantasy prospects. And then you and I are going to do a fantasy Pro Bowl team along with a fantasy value Pro Bowl team. So basically, guys, you didn't draft on the first 3-4 rounds, but still would have made your year-end Pro Bowl list. And then we will do a way too early mock draft for 2016, which should be very interesting and very fun. And then we will round out, Russ, with our usual DraftKings value plays for all four divisional playoff games next week. So without further ado, Russ, let's just jump right in. I think you would agree, and for our maybe one listener out there, we have a theme on this show, which is we try to look at the valleys before we go to the peaks. It's very up and down, but there seem to be more downs than ups this fantasy season, especially pertaining to injuries. But we're going to switch gears a tad, and we're going to jump into head coach firings, which are always a delight. And this season is no different. At this recording Monday night, we have 6 that we will talk about, which may be 1 or 2 more, but for now, we will cover the ones we know, Russ. So let's just get right into it. We will talk about the coaches fired and determine if that's a good thing or a bad thing for those fantasy prospects on those teams. So first, Russ, let's get to the teams that got ahead of the game and fired their coaches a few weeks ago. We'll first kick off with your Tennessee Titans, somebody's Tennessee Titans. They fired Ken Wisenhunt fairly early in the season. It was pretty obvious to them that wasn't working. Mike Mularkey, interim coach for the rest of the way, but no indication that he's going to keep that job. So they will have a new coach for us. Also, their GM, they chose not to re-sign today. So whole front office cleaning house episode in Tennessee today, Russ. And if that doesn't make matters any better, they've got the number 1 overall pick in the draft this upcoming season. So, Russ, I'm going to say this is pretty easy. I don't care who's there next year. I'm going to say it gets better for everyone there. Is that fair?
That I'd say that's a very fair evaluation. I mean, you look at their offensive core, and we've mentioned this a few times. I love it. Like they have a great core around Mariota, which I wouldn't have said before the season started. I was a little hesitant on Dorial Green Beckham. Delaney Walker I did not see as sort of a top flight receiving tight end. I did like Kendall Wright, but all 3 of those guys.
I hope you still don't, Russ. We'll get to that,
But yeah, so I like that offense, and I think they're going to be looking at in the draft either one of 2 players. There's 2 main guys, either Laramie Tunsil, he's a tackle, so I'd like that, or there's another guy from Ohio State, Joey Bosa, he's a defensive lineman. So either one of those, either you make the defense better or you get that O-line straightened out. I think that that team has a lot of potential, and depending on who goes in there, I mean, if Chip Kelly goes in there, who knows the chaos he'll cause. But yeah, I'm pretty optimistic, and I'm pretty excited for Marcus Mariota in the future.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think, to me, that's one of the better looking coaching positions as far as what's there and what's going to be there. Like you said, they got a good young core, and they don't have to spend their first round pick on a quarterback, which is great. They have their quarterback, so they truly can go best player available. And like you said, either one of those players, I think, will help Tennessee and therefore help Mariota. So, yes, I think we agree we're going to be buying on the Tennessee Titans heading into next year. The other team, Russ, that had their coaching vacancy open for a while now. The Miami Dolphins, they previously had Joe Philbin. They filled that with Dan Campbell in the interim. Again, no indication that Campbell will stick around. They also have, I guess, what you would consider their franchise quarterback in Ryan Tannehill. Lamar Miller, free agent, so who knows if he's back. But look, they got Devontae Parker, who really came on down the stretch. And they've got, Jarvis Landry, obviously, who was probably a Pro Bowler in his own right. So, but again, that was all with the coaches there. So are you buying or selling with whoever comes to town in Miami, Russ?
Man, I just don't know. There's a lot of talent there, but I don't know if it all fits together. I like Jarvis Landry. I like some of the players on that defense too. Cameron Wake was out for the year. Obviously, that kind of killed their pass rush. But I like Devontae Parker, but I don't know. And we talked about this before the season. I don't know what Tannehill's ceiling is. So even if he gets a good coach in there, what is his ceiling? So that's something I'm a little hesitant about. And in terms of Lamar Miller, it seems like they're going to let him go. So the running back position's kind of up in the air as well. Jay Ajayi might be a nice buy low in Dynasty if you can get him for cheap. I'm buying Devontae Parker. I don't know if I'm buying the whole situation, though.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I mean, just, for the record, Ryan Tannehill for the season, 4,200 yards, 24 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. His career high is 27. And we now have 5 years worth of data for Tannehill. So I'm going to say 30 touchdowns is maybe his max at this point. And he's already sort of there now. So I don't know, man. I think I may be a little obviously a lot of it is contingent on who they bring in, but I don't know, man. It seems like I don't want to say they've completely maximized the players there, especially Tannehill, but it seems pretty close,
Right. And that's kind of where I'm at. It's like, okay, it's sort of dependent on how good is Devontae Parker now. Because if he becomes a Pro Bowler, yeah, he can throw 30 touchdowns. But if Parker is anything less than that, I'm just not sure how high they can go,
Right. Yeah, that's definitely a situation to monitor because, look, I guarantee you we're going to go into next season with the Ryan Tannehill questions on, maybe this is the year. Well, look, folks, if it hasn't happened by now, I can't believe it's just going to magically happen.
It's amazing that it's year 5. When you just said that, that's amazing.
He just completed his 5th season. So this is it. This is Ryan Tannehill, baby. This is what you're getting. Not many turnovers, but not many touchdowns, period. So it's just I don't know how much further they can go offensively. Like you said, a lot of it is contingent on Devontae Parker, but look, if things don't work out with Jay Ajayi and they got to downgrade that running back position, then, all bets are off at that point. All right, so one more coaching vacancy, Russ, that was made before the official end of the season. The Philadelphia Eagles getting rid of Chip Kelly. Really, they flashed some bright spots this year, but on the whole, I would say it was extremely disappointing. The Sam Bradford experiment did not work out, at least from a fantasy perspective. The DeMarco Murray experiment definitely didn't work out from any perspective. And again, Russ, obviously it's a lot of who's going to get in there, but I don't know, man. I think there's a lot of talent there that they can still further. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't hate that team as much as I probably should right now. I think they do have a lot of talent. I kind of see where he was going with the roster construction. Obviously, it didn't come to fruition this year, but that's a pretty young team. He had a lot of young players there, and obviously, like Nelson Aguilar didn't really do much of anything, but there's just a lot of young players there and a lot of young talent. So Zach Ertz kind of came on at the end of the year, and he's pretty intriguing long term. They seem to like the offensive-minded head coaches. Andy Reid before him, they had him for quite a while. So I'd imagine they go in that direction again. If they do, I'd probably be buying low on pretty much that whole offense.
I think I would too. Whether DeMarco Murray goes back there or not, I don't. I think I'm done with him. But look, even if that means they have Ryan Matthews as sort of the starter heading into next season, that's okay. Ryan Matthews was fairly effective. I mean, he didn't have the best volume in the world, but he still produced. And one name I heard was Doug Peterson, maybe, who's the Chiefs' offensive coordinator, maybe taking that job. Which, again, it's all speculative, but if you see what he did in Kansas City after Jamal Charles went down, and it was pretty amazing what he did, how he was able to work with that. So again, I think I'm with you. I'm going to buy low on a lot of Eagles next year, whether it's Zach Ertz, Jordan Matthews, who came on strong towards the end of the season too.
That's a big storyline to follow, I think. He really played well the last 6 or so weeks of the season, and like, you can look at his season end totals and say, yeah, he didn't get 1,000 yards, but he didn't actually get as many targets as sort of what you'd think, Like, he actually played well this year. So he's only 2 years in, He kind of had big expectations coming into this year. So
yeah, and look, he didn't have 1,000 yards, but he had 943, which was close. Had 6 touchdowns, and he had 400-yard receiving games. So not, it wasn't all bad.
Right.
And like you said, down the stretch, he had, in his last 3 games, 159, 104, and 54 yards. And then he had 4 touchdowns over that span. So, I'm with you. I think I'm buying low on those Eagles for next year. All right, so let's get to the jobs that opened up as soon as the fourth quarter ended in these games, Russ. The Cleveland Browns, which that's just sad. Mike Pettine out. Ray Farmer, the general manager, out. So another complete house cleaning there. First of all, Russ, with the exception of our mutual man crush, Gary Barnidge, what is there to be excited about offensively in Cleveland? With the exception of Josh Gordon, which, again, that's a wild card in itself. But as it's constructed, is there anything to be excited about on that roster for next year?
Yeah, okay. So over the last month, I've kind of started to get excited about Josh Gordon. I put my wall up at least a year ago, and I haven't let it down. But now it's starting to be that time that it's looking like he might get back, at least on the practice field, somewhat soon, or back with the team. So there's clearly immense talent there. We've already seen that. So I like that. Barnidge, obviously, he's a tight end one for the foreseeable future. Even at his age, tight ends sort of last a little longer than wide receivers. So I think he could sustain this for at least a few more years. Duke Johnson, I like him. I have no confidence the Browns won't ruin him, but I do like his potential in that offense as the receiving down back. I think he can be Gio Bernard. So it depends on where he's valued this offseason. I'm not quite sure where everyone else values him right now, but I could see him being a potential value.
You may be a little more bullish on the Browns players than I am. I mean, but given, like you said, Gary Barnidge, I think, is a tight end one only because there's not that many, and as you said, they age pretty well. Josh Gordon, obviously, if he does come back, which, again, we're all hoping and praying he does. But other than that, man, I mean, look, they've got the number 2 pick. You would think they go quarterback, but who knows, man? Seriously, with that team and whoever's running the show there, I don't know. I'm probably not as high as you on the Browns. It seems like it's just a never-ending cycle of, like, poop. It just goes around and around there, and I want nothing to do with it. And believe me, you all can have it. So.
See, there's a burning house right now, and I'm running into it, and you're just standing there like, Russ, I don't know that I want to run in there. And I'm like, dude, it's fine. Come on, man.
Right. Like, and I've got the hose, and I'm like, well, maybe. Like, I'll let him find out. I'll let him figure it out. This is how he learns. So, yeah, look, if you and me, Russ, are ever in a dynasty league and I got some Browns, then believe me, have at it.
I don't have any confidence they won't ruin Duke Johnson because I'm pretty sure that's what's going to happen. But I don't know. He looked pretty good this year. So
Believe me, you can have him for very, very cheap. I'm pulling for you. So let's go to another dumpster fire, Russ. My personal team, my personal favorite team, the San Francisco 49ers, with shockingly letting go Jim Tomsula. Who saw that coming? I don't know who, but I don't know that there was much of a plan there other than, hey, let's just try to emulate the Jim Harbaugh days as much as possible. And look, if Carlos Hyde would have stayed healthy all year, who knows what he would have done, but obviously hurt pretty much the last half of the season. But outside of Hyde, man, is there anything to be excited about? Believe me, I want to be optimistic, but I can't do it.
As we are part of PFF, we do have to track the snaps and who's playing for that team. Quentin Patton and Bruce Ellington, I enjoyed them watching them in college.
Who are they?
And I just don't think that was an NFL offense this year. I don't know, man. Sean Drone, or Dron, however you pronounce that, he made a cameo this year. I was happy for him. He played.
So did DeJuan Harris, like the very end.
DeJuan Harris came out of nowhere. Vance McDonald was a high pick, but there's just nothing there either.
None.
And it's just, and they're starting Blaine Gabbert, so that's pretty much. There's just not a lot of talent on that team right now, and I think this might
not offensively, that's for sure.
Yeah. So in terms of defense, who have you been keeping an eye on the defense? I haven't really.
Look, you still got Navarro Bowman. I think led the league in tackles at the end of the game yesterday. You still got him. He's in his prime, and look, he made it through the whole season after the torn ACL from a couple years ago. You've got Tart in the secondary, who was a surprise, but actually proved to be a pretty good value. Yeah, man. Other than, again, it looks better on defense and offense, but that doesn't mean it's good. So,
right.
Yeah, they have a lot of holes, and look, they've got a high pick, so they might go quarterback if they fall in love with one. They might go best player. Who knows at this point? But I don't know that there's anyone there, with the exception of Carlos Hyde, that's worth anything. And even then, it's not like I'm expecting him to be running back one next year. I don't think he has the supporting cast around him.
If there's one young player I kind of wished had stayed healthy this year, it was him. I actually thought he was kind of coming into his own there, and then.
And he was. Again, he was very effective, but, it was a theme for the 49ers season, Russ, that whatever could happen will happen. So,
right.
And it did. But that's okay. We've got all off season to ponder it, and who knows? Maybe Chip Kelly will come to town and save the day. Who knows?
And resurrect Colin Kaepernick. That's that's
a whole different issue. That could literally take up the whole podcast for us, but we won't go there. All right, the last coaching change, a bit of a surprise. Well, maybe not a surprise, but it was sort of 50-50, I'd say, going in. Tom Coughlin out as the Giants coach, there for over a decade, won 2 Super Bowls, did quite well. Was privy to the Odell Beckham days towards the end. I don't know, man. I don't know. I might eat my words later, but I don't know how you could screw up the Odell Beckham experience.
Bingo.
Right?
Exactly.
I would hope not.
That's how I'm looking at it. Like, you have Eli Manning, who's a good quarterback. He's a good, probably he's right around 10 in terms of starting quarterback, somewhere around there. And when you have that super elite wide receiver, it just covers up so many mistakes that,
right.
Like you said, it's just hard to screw that up. So, I mean, Eli threw a career high in passing touchdowns this year. And I don't see that stopping for the next few years, unless there's some serious injury concerns with Beckham. But, I mean, he pretty much got through the whole year. So those 2 players are all that matters. If they get more secondary players around them, they might be fantasy relevant as well. But There's not much around those two right now, but it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I think if they get somebody, I pray that the Ruben Randall experience comes to a close this season. I'm tired of it. I can't do it anymore, Russ. I can't do it.
He's not a number 2 receiver.
I wouldn't think so. There's some rumblings, Russ, that Ben McAdoo, who's currently the offensive coordinator for the Giants, could sort of slide over to head coach, which, look, I think for Odell Beckham and the Eli Manning owners of the world, I think that would be music to their ears. I think they would love that. And I think that would be, at least the least dramatic change that we've discussed here. So if that's the case, I think Beckham and Manning, like you said, I think they stay where they are. And I think they just continue to do what they do. So
yeah, Randall, I see Randall as a number 3 wide receiver. He's like, you can't put him against, the number 2 option in a secondary, or he's going to struggle. So
I hope. So, all right, Russ. Well, that was all the coaching changes for now. You never know. There could be one. Who knows by the time we end this podcast here. But for now, those are the coaching changes and their fantasy outlooks. A little later, we'll talk about the DraftKings value plays for the divisional rounds. But speaking of DraftKings, there is still time to play for this NFL season. With millions being won each week, every play and every game can take you closer to a life-changing payday. Hurry over to DraftKings.com now and use promo code PFF to play for free with your first deposit. You and I were talking about this. The Millionaire Maker, $3.5 million pot, $1 million to first place. I will be entering several lineups for that this week. But if you're new to DraftKings, you can enter PFF for a free entry now. That's DraftKings.com. So we will get to that a little later. Russ?
Yeah, that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, but we'll cover that. But before that, Russ, let's look back at the 2015 season now in the books, at least from a fantasy perspective. You and I are going to do our fantasy Pro Bowlers, and then we're going to do our fantasy value bowlers, essentially guys that did just as well as these guys, but maybe you got them in the later rounds to prove the ultimate value for these guys. And look, you need those guys if you're going to win your championship. It's certainly not all about who you get in rounds 1 through 4. It's those later rounds and those sleepers that you pick up and ultimately lead you to fantasy glory. But first off, Russ, let's just get the obvious out of the way. For this Pro Bowl roster, we're going to do 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 receivers, 1 tight end, and 1 flex player. Not a super flex, just a regular flex. So at quarterback, I don't know that there's really much debate on this. I know you and I attempted to debate last week, but I will now fully concede. Cam Newton, I think, is your Pro Bowl fantasy starter at quarterback. Is there really any other choice out there, Russ, or no?
No. I saw a tweet today from Pro Football Reference that Cam Newton's the only player ever to have 35 passing touchdowns and 10 rushing touchdowns, which is pretty clearly obvious that nobody else ever did that. But
that's pretty good.
That's
not bad. It was truly a season for the fantasy record books. Look, I truly hope he gets MVP. He's definitely earned it. Threw for 3,800 yards, ran for 636. Like, that's pretty good. Like you said, he had 45 total touchdowns. I don't know how you can top that.
And he scored consistently and then primed at the right time of year for you. So
he did. He did not disappoint. All right, so our running backs, Russ, for our ultimate Pro Bowlers, Devontae Freeman, say what you will, it may have been a good month stretch he had. He, maybe was the passing down guy there, but nonetheless, he, I think is, he was the top running back in fantasy this year. And I think it's the receiving game that probably made him more dangerous, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And say what you want about it just being 4 games, but that 4 games, single-handedly won you 4 straight games, He was scoring literally 40 points a game. So it was just a month. I have concerns about his long-term sort of between the tackles ability, but for this year, man, and you add in the passing game, like you said, the receptions and all that, you couldn't really do better than him this year.
Yeah, I mean he clipped 1,000 rushing yards, only 4 yards a carry, which I think that's the concerning part that you have and that I probably share with you. But 11 rushing touchdowns, and then the receiving game, 73 catches for 578.
Yeah, that's
I mean,
huge.
that's pretty solid. So, all right. Our other running back, Russ, for this fantasy Pro Bowl, I went Adrian Peterson, led the league in rushing and yards and rushing touchdowns. He just keeps on ticking, man. It's pretty amazing, actually, when you think about it.
30 years old, winning rushing titles. That's par for the course, right?
You don't see that every day. And it was impressive. I mean, after, sitting out all of last year, and again, I don't know why we would have ever doubted him. This is the same guy that came back from a torn ACL and ran for 2,000 yards.
It's just
why couldn't we think he could do it again after his whole season off,
His whole, the last 4 or 5 years have just been him overcoming every belief we had about running backs overcoming things. So years off, fine. Major injury, fine. Okay, you win.
Yeah, he hasn't had a season under 4.5 yards a carry. If you go back and look at it. Also, fun fact: hasn't had a season in his entire career, Russ, with less than 10 rushing touchdowns ever.
Unbelievable.
So, yeah, he's pretty good. We will get to that, I'm sure, in our mock draft for next year. But let's move on to the receivers and the dynamic duo, Antonio Brown, Julio Jones. I don't know if anyone was able to get both of these guys on their team, but if you did, I'm pretty sure you won your league.
I sure hope so.
Yeah, Antonio Brown, 136 catches this year, 1,800 yards. And the scary part, Russ, is, and you and I talked about this before, it could have been a lot worse or better, I guess, if you're Antonio Brown owners. I mean, that was with Ben Roethlisberger sitting a few games out. Brown had a couple of duds thrown in there. That's the scary thing. He easily could have had 2,000 receiving yards with no problem, But yeah, he just keeps on ticking. 129 catches last year. Set the it's the record for most receptions over a 2-year span with 265.
That's not going to be touched for a while, I don't think.
I can't imagine. 10 touchdowns this year. He was unbelievable. So, and then look, not to be outdone, you had Julio Jones, who, again, I think a lot of people, I'm not going to say expected Antonio Brown to repeat what he did, but Julio Jones, I think, was the consensus number one receiver heading into fantasy this year. And look, he came through. 136 catches, also 1,800 yards, 8 touchdowns. So, look, between him and Brown, it's really 1A and 1B at this point.
It's really just insane what all these wide receivers are doing now. But I guess we just kind of have to go with it and expect this to be the new normal, right? Obviously, maybe not to this extent, but there's just so much talent now. And, I mean, these guys are only, 26, 27?
Yeah.
They both have a few more years of this left. So,
again, they certainly weren't the issues with their respective teams.
Right.
Look, Steelers are 10-6 and made the playoffs, so I'm pretty sure they're going to ride that Antonio Brown train next year. Julio Jones, look, you could argue it really wasn't his fault. I mean, they had a bunch of turnovers, which were uncharacteristic of the Falcons compared to previous seasons. But again, they weren't really Julio Jones's fault. So I got to believe they're going to go back to that well again next year. So
yes. I don't see his role changing much, but yeah, incredible season.
Yeah. Tight end, I would love to say Gary Barnidge, but look, you can't deny it. Rob Gronkowski, again, that's what he does. That's just what he does, Russ. So, yeah, I don't even need to espouse on it. That's just how he rolled, man.
That's just we plug him in just like any other star.
Yeah. Flex play, and again, this was probably up for debate, but I think it's kind of one of the fantasy feel-good stories. Yeah, Brandon Marshall literally had his best season in his 10th year this year with the Jets. I mean, it was impressive. Still didn't make the playoffs as a player, which, if you're a Brandon Marshall fan, you're kind of rooting for. But fantasy-wise, I mean, look, he was a legit wide receiver one. I think we touched on this last week. He didn't have any duds ever. He never had a down game. He was always solid, Yeah, I mean, 100 catches, 1,500 yards, 14 touchdowns. He had, I'm looking at it, he had 3 games under 62 yards. That's it. And even in those games, he scored a touchdown. So there you go.
Yeah, I'm not sure. So like a lot of players fall off around age 30. Like we joke around about that, but a lot of players do fall off around that age. Once you get past that age and players continue to sort of thrive, who knows when this is going to stop? I mean, he literally had his best season of his career, like you said. That's really rare. Incredible season. Even in a year where all these wide receivers were doing awesome, he still stuck out as probably the best value.
Yeah, I would say so. Because I think a lot of people had their doubts on if he could sort of continue this run in New York, but he did, and then some, and yeah, it's just a good story there. So, all right, Russ. So that was our what I'll term our obvious fantasy Pro Bowl team. Now let's get to our all value Pro Bowl fantasy team, and I'll let you sort of do most of the talking since you constructed this roster. So hit us. Go.
All right, Carson Palmer. You picked him in round 11 plus.
Right.
He threw for 35 touchdowns. That's pretty simplistic. He only had like 2 games below 20 fantasy points this year, so he was automatic every week. Danny Woodhead pretty much thrived on the incompetence of basically the Chargers to do anything positive. And for Melvin, and for Melvin Gordon, he basically did nothing all year, so they were kind of forced to use him, especially when they were down. He was a top 5 running back this year. So, and if I remember correctly, he was round 10 plus as well, right?
Yeah, definitely a later pick because, like you said, I think the expectation was Gordon was going to swoop in there. And look, I don't want to say he had sort of a lost season last year, but he did. He had an injury, a fairly significant one. I think it was his collarbone that ended that season, and he just got overlooked, pure and simple. But like you said, especially in the receiving game, 81 catches for 756 yards.
Silly,
and that's your running back.
Yeah.
All right, who else you got?
D'Angelo Williams. He was one of your literally last round picks in a redraft league. You used him. You bought him as a handcuff to Le'Veon, and he ended up being a top 5 running back and supporting pretty much your entire team the last half of the season. So that's the year we've all been waiting for, right? All these years, he finally did it.
Yeah, and all he needed to do was go to Pittsburgh with the greatest receiver alive, taking away attention from him. But like you said, man, he really turned into a wide receiver one. It was impressive. He ended up with 900 yards.
Yeah.
Even though he definitely wasn't the starter for the whole season. So, and 4.5 yards a carry, which, look, is right in line with his career average. So we shouldn't be surprised by how effective he was. I think we were just surprised at how much usage he got, which, again, wasn't really on purpose. It was sort of out of circumstance. But, hey, if you were smart enough to handcuff Le'Veon Bell in the draft, then it worked out for you.
Mm-hmm. DeAndre Hopkins, he was pretty highly touted, but I'd say the general consensus, including myself, probably should have been a little higher on him going into the year. Those targets should have been something we should have been like, okay, he's going to get a ton, so we might as well just buy him as a wide receiver one. So and that was there all year. So
and that season, despite I don't know how many different quarterbacks they had. I think it was probably at least 3, maybe even 4 by the time it was all said and done. But like you said, the targets just piled up, finished with 111 catches for 1,500 yards, which I'm pretty sure were not even numbers Andre Johnson did in his heyday in Houston. So, yeah, the future is pretty bright with DeAndre there.
Yep. Allen Robinson, tied for the lead in touchdowns and receiving touchdowns this year. And you got him in 7th, 8th round area. So that's a huge value. And he pretty much was consistent the entire season. So that was a huge value.
And another young guy, he was only 22 this season. That's the scary thing. But yeah, like you said, 80 catches, 1,400 yards, and 14 touchdowns. So yeah, another wide receiver one, which I promise you there were teams out there, fantasy teams, that had Andre or Allen Robinson as their number 2, paired with maybe a Antonio Brown, maybe a Julio Jones. And man, if you did that you probably deserve to win.
Yep. Exactly.
Right. Who else you got, Russ?
For our tight end, we have Delaney Walker, who got over 1,000 yards this year. Only 2 games below 12 PPR points. He was pretty much automatic every week. If it wasn't the yardage or a touchdown, he was getting those receptions to sort of give you a reasonable score, even if the team wasn't doing much and it was Zach Mettenberger. It seemed like no matter what, he was always there. So
right.
And that's the list.
Yeah, and like you said, it's those guys that you really got to get in those later rounds if you're gonna do well. Because look, anyone can take a Le'Veon Bell or Jamal Charles with their first pick, but it's those later picks that really determine all that. So that's a good list, and yeah. Again, I guarantee you some of those guys single-handedly won championships for folks. So, all right, Russ, we're getting a little late in this edition, so let's kick the mock draft for the next episode and jump right into the DraftKings value plays. As you and I were talking offline, only 4 games next week, yet still $1 million top prize for the Millie Maker. So that's pretty exciting. So let's get right to it, Russ. 4 games, 8 teams. Let's just jump in. Quarterbacks, who are you looking at as a value?
Yeah, I mean, the Cincinnati Bengals are kind of a wounded duck right now. I'm kind of looking at Ben Roethlisberger away. He's probably going to be highly owned, but I still think if you're playing tournaments, he's a guy you want to make a few lineups with, and obviously you're stacking him with his receivers. But yeah, I'm looking at him as probably my main guy.
Okay. I don't know, man. I like Rodgers at that spot. I mean, he's had obviously a down year, but he's only the 3rd highest priced quarterback for next weekend, and playing Washington, which I think has the potential to be just a shootout. So between him or even Cousins at 5,900, I think those are if you're going to be saving money at the quarterback position, I should say. Those 2 are pretty good options at that point. So
yeah, you're right. That's a very interesting game to sort of stack players with. That's going to be a high scoring one for most likely.
All right, Russ. Running backs, which who knows, man. I mean, you could get Spencer Ware for dirt cheap and him win you the $1 million. But let's jump into it, Russ. Who are you looking at for this week at running back?
It's ugly. Christian Michael versus Minnesota. It's not a great play, but he is 4,400. And if you're trying to get a few of the higher priced wide receivers, he's someone I'm looking at.
Yeah. Look, he had 100 yards last week. So he's obviously peaking at the right time. If you're going to go value, I don't think Spencer Ware's a bad play, especially, the thing that, and you and I were talking about this offline, but with these tournament plays, you got to find the guys that no one else is going to be drafting for these teams, right? You got to get the real under the radar guys. Cause look, it's easy to pick up, Adrian Peterson or even D'Angelo Williams for this week, but it's those sort of, 3rd down guys that could bust one loose that will get an 80-yard touchdown that can make the difference. So, with that said, you've got Alfred Blue, who's not going to be very highly owned.
Yeah.
You've got, guys like Gio Bernard only sitting there at only 4,000. He could break one. So, yeah, it's an interesting week, man. For
the Bengals running backs has been an interesting situation the last few weeks. It seems like since Dalton went out, they sort of went back to pounding Jeremy Hill, and Gio's sort of been non-existent. So I'd think that'd be something to watch. And if D'Angelo Williams doesn't play, the backup is Fitzgerald Toussaint. So that'd be someone maybe you throw in there. He's 3,900. So that's kind of,
again, that's just the nature of divisional rounds. I've only having 4 games going on.
Right.
Receivers, you're going to have your high-priced options, your Antonio Browns, your DeAndre Hopkins, which, again, like we sort of been talking about, I think there's an opportunity to save money at quarterback and definitely at running back to get, nothing but these high-priced receivers, right?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the move. Even if they lose, I see DeAndre Hopkins sort of getting fed tons of targets. That's the only way they're going to move the ball. So that's what they need to do. AJ Green, I mean, he's more of a contrarian play because most people are going to be on the other 2 receivers. But I don't like him as much as the top 2, but he's someone to throw in there if you want to switch things up.
Yeah. As far as any value plays, you've got, you can get Deshaun Jackson at 4,500. He's definitely a long ball threat.
If you like the Packers, James Jones is 4,100. Marvin Jones is 3,700. So
it feels to me like maybe a Martavis Bryant breakout game, Russ. He's sitting there at 5,600. So who knows? That could be a game he goes off for 200 yards. You never know. All right, Russ. At the very end, we've got tight end. A lot of parity there, I'd say. You've got Jordan Reed as your top option at 6,300. But then on down, you've got Tyler Eifert, Travis Kelce, and Richard Rodgers as your as your choices. So, I don't know, Russ. Good luck. Go ahead and pick one.
I like Jordan Reed, obviously. I think he's the clear number 1 this week, and almost like Zach Ertz last week, I think you almost kind of have to throw him in there. I don't trust Eifert. He's a good player, but again, with McCarron in there, it's hard to trust him to be any more than sort of a few catch and a touchdown type guy. So I like Reed for that ceiling.
Yeah, I think, if there's going to be a value play, I mean, Heath Miller's always an option in Pittsburgh. He's dirt cheap this week at hundreds. If you go all out at your receivers, then he's a pretty good he's a good backup option. So
right.
All right, Russ. That's all we have. We managed to get a lot of stuff in and still didn't get to everything we wanted to. We will, of course, kick that to the next episode. But until then, he's Russell Clay. I'm Michael Moore, and we will see you next time on the Fantasy Slant.